Okay, moving on in section 1.4. First, I want you guys to make sure that you've looked at page 113. There's in the top right corner, or at least there should be, steps 1 through 5 for solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. For these examples, you might need to have your book open for that, just so you can follow the steps. But I'm going to go ahead and do an example here, assuming that you've looked at it and maybe even have your book open to that page. Okay, so as you see, we've already got everything pulled over to the left-hand side, and it's equaling 0, so we definitely want to make sure we've done that. But actually, in this case, it is good that we've done that, but when you're completing the square, as you can see on step 2, they actually want you to pull it, that constant term, and in our case, which is a -20, they want you to pull that over to the right-hand side. So let's go ahead and do that. And what we want to do is next, step 3 says we're going to square the half the coefficient of x. So not x squared, which is here, but it says the coefficient of x. So that coefficient of x in this case, coefficient of x is 10. It's that constant that's out in front of 10 or being multiplied by x, in this case, which is 10. So it says to square half of that. So half of 10, that's 5. So half of it is 5, and it says it wants to square it. So 5 squared, 5 times 5 is 25. And we're going to add this to both sides. So let's go ahead and do that. We've got x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 45. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to step. And with step 4, we're going to, or because of step 3, where we got the 25 in there, it's actually going to let us, in step 4, it's going to let us factor this side. And again, factoring it's with the 2 parentheses. So we have to figure out how we're going to break this down. It's going to be a perfect factor, or a perfect square of it. So we see here they're both plus. So in that case, you know everything's going to be positive. And you're going to first look here, and you know it's just x squared. So you're only going to have an x and an x. And again, you're looking at your constant that's over here on the right-hand side, and figure out 2 numbers and multiply to get that. Well, we just did it up here, and they're both 5. So you can rewrite this as that. So let's go ahead and sub that in. Oops, that's supposed to be a 4. So I just fixed it there, and now I got 45. So the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and square both sides, or take the square root of both sides because we want to solve for x, so like we were doing before. And this radical and the square will go away. So we've got x plus 5. Oops. So we've got this, and I'm going to come up here just so we can actually see it. So we got x plus 5. Okay. What we should do next is figure out what we're going to break the square root of 45 down into. And 2 numbers that multiply together are, let's say, 5 and 9. 5 times 9 is 45. Don't forget your square roots. So the square root of 9, that's 3. So 3 times 3 equals 9. So the square root of 9 is 3. So that is going to sub in for a square root of 45. So we got, oh, you know what? I forgot right here, this step, like I told you guys not to forget, I'm doing it. We want to plus and minus this. When we do the square root, it's going to give you a plus and a minus. So right here should be plus or a minus. And again, we got one more step. We're solving for x, so let's go ahead and subtract the 5 to both sides. So x equals negative 5 plus or minus 3 root 5. And that there is your final answer. Again, you've got two answers there. That is plus 3 root 5 and negative 5 minus 3 root 5. So a little bit more work completing the square, but it is useful a little bit later on in your math, depending on how far you guys go. Okay, moving on to the next example. The last example, we didn't really get to utilize step 1 because the coefficient of x squared was 1, so dividing everything by 1 didn't really do much. But at least here, we do get to use step 1 in your book. And what that says is the coefficient of x squared, anything other than 1, basically, you can divide everything by that coefficient so we can get rid of it. So if we divide the whole thing by 4, this 4 will cancel out, and you're left with x squared plus 6 over 4x plus 5 over 4. And obviously 0 divided by 4 is still 0. So one other thing we could do real quick is just simplify, so reduce the fractions, that is. So 6 over 4, that'd be 3 over 2x, and the 5 over the 4 doesn't really simplify. So not a necessity to do this, but it might help. Okay, next we're going to do step 2, and that's where we bring the constant of 5/4 over to the right hand side. Okay. Now step 3, that's where we take the coefficient of x, which is 3/2, 3 over 2, and we want to take that a half of that. So one way to do that is, over here on your side, scratch work or whatever you want to say, side work. If you want to get the half of something and you're not sure what it is, just simply multiply it by 1/2. So in this case, you're multiplying two fractions, so you just multiply the two numerators, which is 3 times 1, so you have 3, and then you multiply the two denominators together, which is 2 times 2, which is 4. So half of 3/2 is 3/4. And the next thing it would tell you to do is to square this. And again here, you just look at the numerator, you square it, so 3 times 3, or 3 squared, is 9. And then again, you look at the denominator, 4 times 4, or 4 squared, is 16. So this is the number we're going to work with. And with this number, again, step 3 tells you you're going to add this to both sides of the equation. So let's do that. So it's 9 over 16. And let's go ahead and simplify the right hand side at least. Let's just drop down. So 9/16 minus 5/4, or negative 5/4 plus 9/16. What we need to do here, since we're adding and subtracting fractions, you need to get a common denominator. So what you could do is, notice that the two denominators are 4 and 16. So negative 5/4 will actually become negative 20 over 16. So you'll take, how did I get that? So you take negative 5 over 4, and we know we want the denominator to be 16. So you're going to multiply this whole thing by 4 over 4. And that'll give you your 16 denominator, but you have to also do it to your numerator. So negative 5 times 4 is negative 20. So negative 20 over 16 plus 9 over 16. Again, this is your side work. I'm just trying to draw it out in case someone doesn't see it right off the bat. You can actually rewrite this as 9 minus 20 all over 16, since they both have a denominator of 16. And 20 minus 9, that's 11, but 20 is negative, and 20 is greater than 9, so you're going to have a negative answer of 11 over 16. So that'll come in here. Okay, the next step, sorry I had to erase the side work there, so if you wanted to look at it again, just back up and pause it real quick and write it down or something. The next step here is step 4, and that's going to be factoring this side, the left-hand side. And again, you want to look at your squared term, which is x, and it's x times x, which is x squared. So that'll be your first variables. And then you look at the constant, which in this case is 9/16, and you need to find two numbers that multiply together to get that. So two numbers that multiply together to get 9 is 3, and two numbers that multiply together to get 16 is 4. So 3 over 4 will be your two constants here. And I put the pluses in there just because we know from here and here everything's positive, so you know, it's going to be positive. And again, like I showed last time, this can be rewritten since they're the same thing in the parentheses and there's two of them. You can rewrite it like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and sub that in. And we'll go up here and start writing up here. That's negative. So now, what do we do to keep going? Well, we're going to take the square root of both sides. And the radical and the square will cancel out, so you're left with x plus 3/4 equals, and that of course is equal to plus or minus negative 11 over 16. So now what we can do is we've got the negative underneath the radical, so pull out our I, or square root of negative 1. So we've got negative 1 times 11 over 16. That's it, right? There we go. Again, plus or minus. I think my pen's going up. Again, we're solving for x, so let's go ahead and subtract that over, or subtract the 3/4 over. And we know that the square root of negative 1 is I. Let's go ahead and do that all in one step. So we've got negative 3/4 plus or minus I root 11. And this 16 up here is actually underneath the square root as well. And we all know that the square root of 16 is 4. So let's go ahead and simplify that a little bit. And that way we have an easy, cleaner denominator. And that way you also don't have the square root or the radical in the denominator, which is something you always want to avoid. So your final answer, you have two of them. You've got negative 3 plus root 11. Oh, I forgot the I, sorry. Sorry about that. Trying to think of every little step here to show. Root 11. And because we simplified the square root of 16 over here, and down here we can see that they both have the same denominator. You can write it like this, where it's all over the same denominator. So we have two answers. This is one of them. The other one is obviously not plus again. It's supposed to be subtraction. Sorry. And there's your two final answers. And let's move on to the quadratic equation.